I bet that at some point in your life you were an employee for someone else. I also bet that you may have even wondered why the owner of the company started the company and what sort of trials and tribulations they had along the way. One of the very first things I do when I start working with a new client is find out what their story is. I'm curious about why did they start the company? What problems in the marketplace do they see they could uniquely solve? And what did they bring to the party that made them different? Sometimes the answer I get is it's just they need a job, but most of the time it's not just something like I needed a job. Most of the time there's a magnificent story that comes out, but it almost always takes more than a little bit of prodding for me to get it out of the owner. And that's what today's video is about. Today we're going to talk about why you need to know your story and why it's important for you to tell your story whenever possible. Hi, I'm Josh Patrick, the founder of Stage 2 Planning Partners in the Sustainable Business. I'm also the guy who's responsible for putting together our Cracking the Cash Flow Code program. I'm the author of Sustainable, a fable about creating a personally and economically sustainable business. You might wonder why stories are so important. Well, they give you context when you ask your employees to do something. Stories are so much easier to understand than how-to instructions. It's the reason I wrote my book Sustainable as a giant story, because too many business owners over the years have told me that, these how-to business books are great, but I never get through to them. I never understand them. I don't relate to them. But stories are easier to understand. They're easier for people to relate to. It's a reason why people like to hear stories. We're a species whose stories means things. We tell stories about our growing up. We tell stories about what got us in place. But somehow in business, we think that storytelling isn't an important thing. Well, if that's your belief, I'm going to tell you you're flat out wrong. So here's what I want you to start with knowing. First, I want you to know what your story is. I want you to be able to say, why did you start the business? You need to have an origin story about why you started the business. What was the problem that you were trying to solve? Could it be for you or could it be for the world? What were some of the war stories about successes and failures that you had along the way? The wins are great to talk about, but the truth is your people and you are going to learn a lot more from the losses, the things that went wrong along the way. What happened? Why did it happen? What could you have done differently that would have kept it from happening? And most importantly, what did you learn from it? One of the things I like to tell people, I love mistakes, but I only love mistakes under one set of circumstances, when there's a learning from there. So when I make a mistake or somebody working with me makes a mistake, I only have one question for them. What did you learn? And that's the whole point of your stories. Stories are a great way of telling your people, here's a mistake I made, here's something that went wrong with our business, here's what we learned from it, and this is what we can do different in the future. Doesn't that make sense to you? The thing is, stories are teaching tools, they're teaching opportunities, and there's something that I just think is so important to having that be part of the success in your business. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to develop a group of stories that helps people in your company know what they should be doing. How should they be acting? Why should they be acting that way? And what should be the result of what happens? Now, when things go wrong, you want to have stories about things going wrong so people know they're not going to get fired if they make a mistake. Now, I hope that's true in your business. I hope you're not firing people just because they make a mistake. I want you to look at your systems first around that. But the truth is, you need stories so we can tie our values into the company and tie how our values work with creating the process that we have, how we serve our customers. Those are all part of the thing. Now, if you get yourself in the habit of telling at least one story a day, in the beginning you might feel a little bit awkward. They might not be the best stories in the world, but you don't get better at something unless you practice it. So if you're telling at least one story a day, that means at the end of the year, you're going to have a total story 200 different stories, or one story 200 times, or a combination of the two. But you're going to get better at it. And as you get better at it, you're going to be using stories as a teaching tool in a more effective and efficient manner. You know, understand your employees are going to learn a lot more through stories than through commands. You know, going back to why I wrote my book as a large story versus a how-to book is I wanted people to implement stuff. And what I know is that as people are reading through the book, they're going to relate to the stories in the book, or some of the stories anyhow, and they're going to say, I can take that and apply it to my business a lot easier than I just go blah, 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 blah about your story, about what I want you to do. Now, I could have written my book as is, here's what the 5 steps you need to go through to create a sustainable business that's economically and financially sustainable for you and your family. But you probably would never made it through the whole book. But because I wrote it as a story, there's a pretty good chance that you're going to finish because you're only going to find out what happened at the end. So what do you think? Are you willing to develop stories about the origin of your company? Are you willing to share those stories even if they're a little bit embarrassing, especially if they're a little bit embarrassing? If you do, I can promise you one thing. You're going to be very richly rewarded. So why don't you leave a comment below, and while you're at it, download our free infographic on the 5 success stages of those who want to crack the cash flow code. Hi, this is Josh Patrick. You're at the Sustainable Business. I hope to see you back here really soon.